Welcome to Now UTOKing, which is a new series consisting of short videos on how to define key terms in the UTOK framework. Today, we're taking a look at the concept of behavior. Behavior is a really central concept in UTOK. And the reason is because it's a concept that bridges psychology into natural science. And the relationship between these is absolutely central, the relationship between behavior, psychology, and natural science. It's obviously a very important word in the history of scientific psychology. Mainstream psychology defines it as a science, as the science of behavior and mental process. Behaviorists define the field, literally psychology is the science of behavior. At the same time, we know that it is tricky to delineate exactly what is meant by behavior. Skinner himself said there was no essence of behavior, and there have been philosophical essays written on how do we know when a wink is a blink and what is the difference? Is a blink an example of behavior? If a blink is an example, what about something like a heartbeat or a growl in your stomach? What about when a rat freezes in the presence of the cat? Is the absence of that behavior or movement a kind of behavior? There are a lot of different complexities that arise when you get into these kinds of situations. We can gain some utility by just going straight to the dictionary. When you go to the dictionary, you see that behavior consists generally of three different primary definitions. The first, and its origin, relates to comportment, and that is the idea about whether or not somebody is behaving properly or not. And in fact, the word to have is to have the capacity. Behave relates to have the capacity to behave correctly with a proper comportment. So we could say things like, oh, those kids are behaving so badly, they're unruly. That's the first and most general definition. Then we see it emerge in the context of psychology in particular, but science in general, where it basically means both observable movements, this is the most general, observable movements or movements that generate effects that then potentially could be observed, and then finally functional activities of organisms or animals. So comportment and a general definition in relationship to movements that can generate effects, and the functional activities of organisms or animals. So what UTOK can do is it ties together, especially through the tree of knowledge, the nested relationship between all of these. And then in general, what it says is that it's going to show a relationship between movement in general that takes place on the material dimension, then functional activities of organisms, functional activities of animals, and ultimately the behavior of persons. And this seems kind of obvious when you think about it, but the fact is, obviously it's not if psychologists are defining their science as the science of behavior. It isn't that psychologists are interested in behavior in general, it's that they're interested in a particular kind of behavior. UTOK makes this clear, and the kind of behavior that we might be interested in is most obvious when we look at things like, to use an example, we can consider three different cats, okay, and the behavior of them. So let's imagine three cats in a tree, and they all drop. The first cat drops and lands is dead, okay? And that cat, we can say, as it drops, is it exhibiting behavior? And the answer is yes. It's exhibiting behavior as a function of gravity and physical laws. And it bounces there dead as a function of the material object that it is. Let's say the second cat is anesthetized. It drops, and when it lands, overtly it behaves in accordance with the laws of gravity. However, if we were to look inside, its breathing, its metabolism, it would exhibit living behavior. All the coordination of its organ systems are still operative to maintain the complex functional design. Finally, the third cat's alive and awake. It drops, rotates, lands on its feet, and takes off. That, the behavior of the animal as a whole, is animal mental behavior, according to UTOK. So it divides the world up and allows us to see the frequencies of behavior. It's material behavior, living behavior, in this case animal mental. We can even imagine a fourth imaginary cat that drops, lands, and says, why the hell did you drop me out of a tree? That would actually be culture person, and of course it's imaginary because we're imagining animal behave that way. So now what you see then is there's nested movement in general, and then functional living, functional animal, and potentially functional person. UTOK then also says that what this does is it affords us to delineate the idea that psychology is interested in particular kinds of behavior, mental behavior in animals, culture person behavior, and the behavior of humans, and also says that actually science in general is interested in mapping the behavior patterns in nature. We see this generally with the tree of knowledge, which depicts the universe as an unfolding wave of behavior across different dimensions of complexification, matter, life, mind, and culture. And it depicts science as different domains mapping these different dimensions. This connection grows when we consider the periodic table of behavior. The periodic table of behavior says that there are not just different kinds of entities behaving in different ways across the dimensions, but within the dimensions there are primary wholes, underneath them primary parts, around them primary groups, and then aggregates across scale within each dimension. Let me give a clear example. At the material dimension of complexity, we have atoms organized as primary wholes, things like hydrogen. The atoms themselves have parts that are constituent made up of, like things like electrons. And then atoms can get into groups of molecules, like a water molecule, and they can also then exist across aggregate scale. For example, atoms gathering together to form stars. So the periodic table of behavior basically says there are primary parts, primary wholes, primary groups, and then that can be aggregated across scale. And science then is the process of mapping those. And we can see that in the science of particle physics, the science of atoms, the science of molecules and chemistry. We can also see that in terms of larger scale systems, things like solar system, astronomy, stars, the mapping of stars scientifically. We can move up into the life dimension, say there are parts. The core part that the unified theory identifies is a gene, because it's the core informational part that's going to organize the living systems. And then the cell is the primary whole. Then you get multi-cells. That goes also across aggregate. And then we see the same pattern. There's a neural network, an animal, groups of animals, justification, persons, and groups of persons. So the periodic table of behavior shows that we can divide the different dimensions into primary levels that can further be differentiated into parts, wholes, and groups. And that gives us a levels by dimensions map. And what that shows actually, or makes really the prediction, is that then science will be able to be categorized by these different areas, because what science fundamentally about is about building maps of behavior change in nature. So ultimately, what does this all mean? It means that behavior is a central concept in science. We can define it as general entity field change. Science is about measuring that, developing maps of that, and then through the tree of knowledge and the periodic table of behavior, we can see how the natural sciences have mapped changes in behavior across different levels and dimensions of complexification. With that, we can define this term with a lot more utility, both in terms of its breadth and its specification. Particularly, we'll get into psychology. There's a particular kind of behavior we psychologists are interested in, mental behavior. That's going to set us up to define what mind is, and we'll be dealing with that next on Now UTOKing.